Welcome back. Today, I want to talk to you about how to choose a laser, or what you should think about or look at when you're choosing a laser. And this actually applies to CNC routers. It applies to 3D printers. It can apply to a little bit of everything. You just have to look at the questions and whatnot and some of the decisions that you need to make. So first of all, let's start with determine what you want to do. We see it all the time. We get asked questions. I want to buy a laser. Okay, well, what do you want to do with it? Do you want to cut wood, acrylic? Do you want to engrave? Do you want to do metal? Things of that nature. So once you decide what medium you want to work with, should help you narrow down your selection. If you want to cut wood, a CO2 laser. If you just want to do, some engravings, or you have certain things, you may need a diode laser. You want to do metal, you need a fiber laser. You want to do a variety of things, a UV. But with each of those decisions, or with each of those machines, there's a list of other questions that go into it. And decisions that you need to make. Am I going to tell you what laser to buy here? No, not at all. But what you want to do with it. So let's use an example. I want to cut 1/8 inch wood, and that's all I really want to do. Well, do you need a 130 watt machine or a 150 watt machine? Probably not. A smaller tube size would potentially benefit you more. With larger tube sizes typically come larger footprint lasers. Our 130 watt is rather large compared to our 80 watt. So, and then the laser that we originally owned was a 70 watt, but it was tiny. And we'll get back into that in a minute. So determining what you want to do. I only want to engrave metal. Well, then you don't need to worry about a CO2 laser. Start looking at your fibers. Or I want to be able to engrave just about everything, the UVs. But now those come with their own issues. Fibers and UVs typically are very small footprints. They're based on the lens sizes, so you can fluctuate anywhere from 100, 110 millimeters or smaller to 300, maybe even more. You only get a small area compared to a larger CO2. So start thinking about that. It's probably the first thing. What do you want to do? Next, look at how much space do you have. If you're trying to figure out you've got this tiny little room, or you don't have a room and it's got to go in your dining room or a bedroom, well, that should help determine what machine you need. If you need a large one, you still have to think about doorways. How do I disassemble it? How many people do I need to tote it upstairs? Things of that nature. So look at the space. Also look at your infrastructure. Depending on what laser you buy, what manufacturer, you may have additional things that go along with it. A DC excited glass tube, for example, requires a water chiller. That's an extra piece of equipment that takes up more space. So start looking at that. Do I have the power requirements necessary? Some lasers only require 15 amps. Other lasers require 20 amps. And sometimes it's specifically a dedicated circuit for that laser so that there's no other power requirements on that circuit. So that's another thing that you have to think about on top of with your infrastructure is, what power requirements, how am I going to exhaust this? Do I have to have a fume extractor? That's another piece of equipment that's going to take up room. That's another set of power requirements. Am I in a neighborhood? Or am I on a 30-acre farm where nobody cares what I'm exhausting, what fumes are exhausting out? So those have to be considered as well. And all of these so far should help you to start deciding on what laser that you need to buy, or CNC router, or 3D printer, or what have you. Number 3, maintenance. I call maintenance, support, and cost. So there are some laser manufacturers out there that are, for lack of better words, less quality, require somebody to tinker with it and constantly do maintenance on it. Whether it's adjusting the bed to make sure it's properly trimmed with the head, or always realigning mirrors and lenses. Uh, you know, what additional stuff is required that may or may not be incorporated into that cost. Our first laser required us to upgrade a chiller. Oh, I can't say it required us to. It came with a fish pump. Well, anybody that's been doing this a while knows a 5-gallon bucket with water in it and a fish pump doesn't really do much to keep the tube cool on the glass tubes. So we paid the extra cost or had to buy a chiller. Was it the right chiller? It worked, but it probably wasn't the best that we could find. With that being said, do I need an RF tube versus a glass tube? The RF tubes do not require water chillers. So that's a little bit more expensive on the cost, but it's one less piece of equipment and one less point of failure. Support. There are laser manufacturers out there that have fantastic support. And on the opposite end of that, there are laser manufacturers out there that have zero support, or the support is not worth it. So look into what support that you may need. If I'm the kind of person that is always likes to tinker and I really don't need to talk to anybody, I can read a manual or I can look at stuff and figure it out, then maybe one of those manufacturers is what I want. Or do I want plug and play? And when something goes wrong, do I want people that are there, whether it's an email or a phone call, that's always available, or is available as often as possible? So you have to think about that support aspect of it, and what you're willing to do and what you're not willing to do. And then, with cost is, again, your budget. If you have $1,000 budget, looking at a CO2 laser is probably not going to be in that realm. If you have a $60,000 budget, then yes, or 10,000 or whatever. This goes with CO2s, fibers, and UVs. So take your budget into account and realize that you may just need to save more money to buy what you want instead of rushing in to a less expensive machine or less expensive equipment and then realizing that it's not worth it, whether it's because you're tinkering with it all the time or you have to constantly make modifications. Also think about safety requirements. So when I talk about safety requirements, it's not just, well, do I have a fire extinguisher or a fire blanket? It's what protective equipment do I need to function with these lasers? Typically a CO2 that's got a door on it like these, I don't really need to worry about glasses to protect my eyes because the glass and the framework and everything else. And I'm not sticking my head in there and looking right at the beam, where a UV or a fiber may be an open frame and it requires a certain amount of safety precautions to be taken. Or you can opt for, like the ones that we have, that are enclosed. Open versus enclosed is a whole another set of subjects that talks about the capabilities of the lasers, but it's something that you should consider. When we made our decisions, we also considered clients. We're in a small shop and clients come in. I'm not going to stop the lasers because there's somebody in here. So we made sure that our lasers had the safety requirements that we needed to protect our customers as well as ourselves. So again, think about the safety requirements, whether they're enclosed or open, or if you need extra equipment. Extras seem to be what nickels and dimes people to death. So just keep that in mind. And last but not least, take the time to do the research. Don't just hop on a social media site and go, hey, why should I buy this? Or read the comments and see what other people think. Ask the questions. Ask the questions to the manufacturers. Now, they're going to be a little bit more biased, and some of their advertising may be a little shady, in my opinion. So, ask the questions. I tell you this, stop listening to influencers. They're really only in it for the money. Certain influencers will swear up and down by whatever brand that's sponsoring them. So take that into account, whether it's with an accessory or a laser, a CNC, a 3D printer. So keep that in the back of your mind. Look at the pros and cons of what you want to do with the laser. If I want to only do metal, then why do I need a CO2? But, that goes both ways. So, research your pros and cons and look in it. I can tell you from my experience, I wish we had done more research before we bought our first laser. We decided on that brand of laser because a friend of ours had one. He liked it. And I knew that if I had issues, I could ask him for help. Was it a mistake? It taught us. It taught us about other manufacturers. It taught us, the build quality and the maintenance on it. I constantly had to fiddle with the bed. It seemed about once a month, the bed would get out of, I don't want to say alignment, but it wasn't properly trammed. So I would have to adjust the bed height to make sure that it was the proper distance from the nozzle. That got a little frustrating, having to constantly do that. Some lasers will get out of a line easy. Some lasers will vibrate and fall apart. Some you look at speeds. And just because a manufacturer says, well, my laser can, engrave at 1,000 millimeters a second or 2,000 millimeters a second, doesn't always mean you have to or that you should. There's other accounts that have to be taken for that. So, that's the one thing I truly wished that we had done more research. We had used multiple lasers and realized that the one laser that we thought was good because it was just expensive as hell really isn't the best suited for what we needed. Programs. The majority of them run Lightburn. Some have their own proprietary software that they run. So also look into that. Look into whether it's a cloud-based service. Do I always have to have internet to run my machine? Or like there's been some issues, does the manufacturer have the ability to lock me out of my own machine? So, take those things into account. I also wish that when we had started this, that I or we had completely understood how lasers work. And up until recently, I had kind of had a general idea, but then doing some research, I learned. They pretty much operate off of a wavelength. You have the visible light spectrum. So, and then you have the ultraviolet spectrum, infrared spectrum, and beyond, and below. So obviously the UV, for example, operates in the ultraviolet spectrum. Well, it's not designed to heat up the material. So it does a fantastic job of marking and engraving materials without melting or burning, such as plastics. Some suede matting that's been tried because of the wavelength that's being used of light. It doesn't cause the damage that, say, a CO2 laser would do, or a fiber. Where fibers on the opposite end of the spectrum are in the infrared spectrum. They're designed and operate most proficiently with like metal. Metal reflects higher than, I can't say higher, But for a CO2 laser, it operates 10 times above a fiber that, so metals reflect that wavelength of light, where the fiber wavelength gets absorbed and can actually remove the material. A UV on the opposite end can put a mark on it, and can change the color of the mark depending on what frequency or the Q pulse or things like that, the settings. But it really may not dig a lot into the material. On the other hand, a fiber really doesn't do wood. Where the CO2, the UV, those wavelengths actually do what needs to be done on like wood. We've proven the CO2s on plastics like PLA. It can do it, but it has a tendency to melt it or gives a very fine mark. But the UV does a fantastic job on that. Everybody runs glass. So what we found that with the CO2 in glass is it's heating the glass up, causing fracturing, and then you get these flakes, which everybody that's done glass can, see the little glass flakes or whatnot, or get them on your finger. But when you turn around and run glass in the UV, it appears to be vaporizing the glass. It leaves a powder or a dust instead of flakes. I've rubbed my finger across it. I've had no, shards or nothing like that. It's literally just a dust. Fiber passes through the glass because of the wavelength, just like with clear acrylic. But a fiber will do black acrylic fantastic. People use the leatherette. CO2 has a tendency to be a little finicky on leatherette, especially when you have larger tube sizes. The 130 watt doesn't do the greatest on leatherette. The 80 watt does a pretty good job. Some of the smaller, like a 30 watt RF tube, because of the spot size, does a fantastic job. The UV does, amazing on it. The fiber actually does really good on it. So think about those things before you start to purchase. People have asked, why the fiber or the UV or what materials, and it kind of goes along with it. So, realize I had a conversation earlier today with somebody that was asking about, they wanted to purchase a laser. So what do you want to do with it? Well, I really want to cut wood. Okay. Or I really want to engrave wood, then look at a CO2 laser. But I don't have a lot of space. Okay, well, look at a smaller one. Knowing that this individual has run lasers in the past with RF tubes, I recommended a small RF tube laser that, and knowing that she doesn't make a lot of money, and said, okay, what's your budget? Well, I really only want to spend about $5,000. Okay. So you don't have a lot of space. You want it to be able to travel. You don't have a lot of money, or you have, this budget in mind. So look at this brand. Look at this. She's like, well, do I need a fiber, or do you want to do metal? Not really. I want to do more wood. Okay, well, take fiber out of the equation if you want to do wood. Now, again, with the fiber and the UVs, you have a smaller workspace. I don't have these massive beds that I can put larger pieces in. I am very limited on the amount of space that a UV and a fiber can do. So when you're thinking about your material, you're thinking about what you want to do with it, realize size. I want to make, 13-inch door hangers, or, 24-inch door hangers, or whatever it may be. Okay, well, you have to look at this bed size. With this bed size comes tube sizes. Do you need this monster, or do you need something small? Do you ever think you want to do something bigger? So all of these things play into the choosing what machine that you want to do. And again, if you've made it this far, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that one manufacturer is better than another. We have our preferences. I'm very fond of this manufacturer. I know what the support is. I know what the costs are because the costs are right up front. I know what the maintenance schedule is because everything is annotated on their website. Our first laser, um, maintenance was constant. It was a little bit more difficult to clean because we had to put actual grease and stuff on the gantry to keep the bearings and all. Which just you put grease in something that's going to get dirty, the grease gets dirty. The way it's designed with focusing was a little bit more of a challenge. The overall build wasn't the greatest in the world, but the support was pretty good. Every time I called, I got somebody and they walked me through the steps of fixing it. So, that was a plus for them. When we started looking at them initially, it's okay, this machine's going to cost you $5,000. And this is what you get. Okay, now we got to add shipping. Now we got to add tax. Okay, well, what type of chiller do you want? This is what comes with it. Or we can add an additional for this, or add an additional for this. Okay, got it. So those costs just kept adding up. Other manufacturers are, this is your cost, this is what you get. And it's everything that you need. Some are, you have to buy the machine. And then you have to buy an air pump. And then you have to buy a chiller. And you have to buy the ductwork. And you have to buy everything that goes into it. So when you're figuring your cost, stop and think about that. What are all the other things that have to go with it so that it can be used? There's manufacturers out there that incorporate everything into one and it's all inside and everything's great. So fantastic. Now let's look at something along those lines, that maintenance. Well, how do I get to the pieces and parts to repair them, to fix them, to replace them, whatever it may be? And how do they work? Do I have a small chiller that's designed just to passively cool that is located directly by a heat source? Well, it doesn't make a lot of sense if you have electronics or something that's producing a fair amount of heat and then you're expecting cool water to flow right over top of it without heating up. So some of those things that also need to be considered. There's a long list. I mean, I've given you about 5 of them right now that probably the top things in our head of how to make this decision. So I truly hope it's helped. I hope that it turns a light bulb on so that you or whomever can make an intelligent decision on which manufacturer. And whichever one you choose is completely up to you. I really don't care. I know what my preferences are. I know why we choose them. And I've said it over and over again. But just because you may not choose what I choose doesn't mean you're wrong until you realize that you may be wrong, or I realize that I'm wrong. So, take all these things into account. I hope you've learned something. And other than that, I truly hope y'all have a great day.